Okay, here we go. And hello, darlings and hamburgers, French fries and friends. Good to see you all and good to be here. It's always good to be here. As Deb and I said, any day that you are above ground is a good day. So, anyway, a pleasure to get to spend some time with you. I'm Tad, for people flicking past who might wonder. Although we have a very small, very select coterie of cognoscenti here to participate in these readings. So, I think probably most of you know who I am by now, but I feel compelled to say it anyway. Yeah. Anyway, so we are going to be reading tonight. Since I do two different broadcasts or two different readings on the weekend, I'm going to go back and cover some of the stuff, the news of the week in Tadland, or Tad and Debland to be more fair, since we are very much a team of two. And what I am going to cover in that particular what's the word I'm looking for in that particular respect is okay, that one I can get rid of then, is the news that was shared kind of by surprise about the possible Otherland TV adaptation, which I'm sure some of you, if you didn't watch the previous reading or haven't seen it yet, or you're going to pick it up on YouTube or something later on, I will just kind of go back over some of the information. The first piece of information is that I wanted to assure everybody that if I had known, if I had known that piece was coming out, I would have prepared a bit better, and we would have probably turned it into more of a big reveal on our social media. But a wire was crossed, and somewhere between the various production ends of the possible project and our end, as mentioned, the wire crossed, and we didn't get informed ahead of time that that particular article was going to be written. So, for those of you who are not aware of the details, I will just mention to you, we are in the process of trying to put together an adaptation for television of the Otherland books. And the occasion for the press release, or the thing that came out, the article that came out, was because we have, or the producers as a group have hired Mike Weber, who, among other things, was one of the executive producers, I believe, on the Wheel of Time, which is currently running, and Platige, who were as a production company who were involved in The Witcher. And so that came out, and that was in fact the first public mention of the Otherland adaptation. So let me just bring you up to speed. This has actually been going on for probably 4 years. My good friend Ilva said last night that we had first informed her of 2019 that there was talk about it happening, this specific deal, and so I will take her word for it because she's smarter than me. Anyway, so it's been going on for about 4 years. What has obviously, the pandemic put a big hold on the whole project for most of 2 years. And then more recently, there was a lot of stuff with the writer's strike and things, and the ripple out effect of all of that from Hollywood out into the rest of the world. But we've been working on it for quite some time. We signed the deal some time back, 2-3 years back. But as I said, a lot of it got put on hold. Many have been the times that I have wished, because people said, well, is anybody going to ever do an adaptation or whatever? And I would have loved to have been able to say something, but of course no announcements had been made, and we didn't know what was happening with it. So I was forced to keep stum, as the British say, or as specifically the English say. I doubt there's many people in Northern Ireland or whatever who are saying stum, but I could be wrong. Anyway, it's very much something that we had to just sort of go, okay, we'll just stay quiet. And in fact, as I mentioned, I told some of you, I don't remember which broadcast it was, but I talked about the Saudi Arabian deal that fell through as soon as the journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered, and we all just walked away from it because we could not imagine anymore doing a deal with the Saudi Arabian government. I'm talking to you, professional golfers. But so, I'm always reluctant to make too big a deal too early on about these kinds of things. Anyway, we've had lots of other things over the years, including Warner Brothers purchasing the rights to other land, which I guess they thought they might be able to make a single movie out of it. And by the time that the people in the sort of money section of Warner Brothers understood that the people who had bought the rights wanted to do this and that it would be really a multi-movie thing, they basically just stopped doing anything with it. But we got paid some money, so no complaints there. None whatsoever. And since that was years ago, it's not like it held up anything else that was going to happen. The simple fact is, I am not quite kryptonite for film and television producers, but I'm definitely a difficult sell. I don't sell in the gigantic numbers, say, that George's Game of Thrones sold, for a number of reasons I won't bore you with, at least my own personal belief as to why that's true. And nothing to do with George's writing, which of course is very fine and I admire very much. But the fact is that I write really long books, and it's hard enough to get the first readers of a Hollywood production company to read a really, really, really long book. Nobody above that stage of things is going to ever go near something as long as even one of the other land books, let alone all four of those monsters. Now, needless to say, and hear me knock wood, if the production continues forward and actually goes into filming and all that stuff, and we have something, I will certainly tell you what I can tell you about it along the way. I will be very interested. I will be very involved, I think, because at this point, I believe my job is pretty much story editor. I will not be writing all the scripts. You don't do that in TV because of the way the schedules work. And I wouldn't want to anyway, to be honest with you. I wouldn't be able to write anything else. But I will certainly be involved in figuring out how the whole thing will fit together and the kind of creative vision for it and all that. I'm actually fascinated. I mean, I hope it gets to that stage. I count on nothing. I have learned through many difficult experiences, not that difficult. So yeah, I'm still making a living writing books, but I have learned through many, let's say, disappointing experiences that you never know what's going to happen. And when you're dealing with film and television, you're dealing with such big chunks of money that things can go south in a heartbeat. It really can. Or things can go into turnaround and sit around for years and years and years with nothing being done and not ever get revived, or get revived only when someone else comes along who's got that current Hollywood heat and can say, I want to do this project, and they get to do that. But then again, people who have that current Hollywood heat may be like, yeah, I want to do this project, but I want to set the whole thing on Mars, or whatever. So there's a number of slips twixt cup and lip, as the old saying goes. Many a slip twixt cup and lip. And I count on nothing, but I certainly hope it happens. I'll be very happy if it goes forward. And at each stage, as it becomes more real, if it becomes more real, I will kind of let you guys know what's going on now that I can talk about it. And I will, be keeping my fingers crossed, because I'd love to see something like this happen while I'm still alive enough to enjoy it. One of the good things about Philip K. Dick, who is one of my very favorite writers, is that he, at least because of things like Blade Runner, which of course was based on his novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, because of Blade Runner and a few other things, he had started to actually kind of get known outside the small world of science fiction readers. And compared to the world of moviegoers, it is a very small world indeed. And I'm kind of in that situation where I'm pretty well known amongst my peers and amongst fairly dedicated readers. And of course, very wise and tasteful people like yourselves, but I am not super well known on the national or international stage outside of a few bits and bobs and places here and there. Like I was very well known in Germany. I'm still fairly well known because of, among other things, the Other Land radio show. So there's probably a built-in audience in Germany, and certainly some of the production is coming from that end of things. Anyway, so here we stand. That's all I can really say at the moment is contracts have been signed for some time. We now have Mike Weber on board. Things are going ahead, and we seem to be developing some new momentum post-COVID. And that's really all I can tell you right now. And I hope I have more to tell you soon. And I hope it happens. But again, I have learned not to put all my eggs in one basket. I have learned not even to try and find eggs. You just wait till somebody hands an egg to you. And then you say, thank you. Thank you for this egg. So, not multiple eggs, not putting them in a basket. I'm not even at that stage yet. So. But that's also how I approach all of these things is, I try not to get too high when things are good, and I try not to get too low when things go wrong. And one of the ways you don't get too low when things go wrong is you prepare yourself. So call me cautious, whatever. Anyway, so that is the main news on that front. As far as the rest of everything goes, we have managed to get 2 of our 4 young people into housing. Another one seems to have housing settled for the moment. We are still working on our 4th and last. Deb and I are going to be probably moving back to our old house sometime first week or 2 of January, which is not that long now. Before then, we are going to be doing a zillion other things, including Deb's birthday, Christmas, helping with moving, helping with this and that and the other thing, and trying to get the stuff that we're doing at the house, the other house, and this house, because we're going to be moving out of it, but then the family's probably going to be selling. Stuff. There's stuff. So we're going to be very busy. I'm going to continue trying to do these. I think next week it's Christmas Eve. I'm going to have to think about that. I suppose I could do, because it'll actually be the night before and then actual Christmas Eve. We'll see. I'll decide during the week based on what else I have to do as to whether I'm going to be doing my regular reading next week, or if I'm even going to be conscious at that point, because things are happening thick and fast around here. Again, I hasten to say, no negative news for us anyway at the moment. Everybody seems to be fine. So I hope that's true for you. I just saw one of our dear friends tonight, and whose brother is oftentimes a visitor on these readings, and they just lost their mom. Needless to say, that strikes very close to home, but also just they're people that we care about, and the pain is the pain, and it's real. So the world is not perfect by any means, and but at the moment we're doing okay. So that's all I can report on. Okay, anything else? Oh, let me go check and see, assuming everything is on. Where did you come from? Here we go. Okay. Let me see what I've got in the way of comments and people who've showed up. I see Chenoa, I still don't know how that's pronounced properly. I see Joanna McCallum, who has showed up to say hello. Cliff, hello, good. How are you and your family? Hope you're well. Chris Van Dahl, thank you for the kind words. A pleasure as always. Ray Weatherford, good to see you. Kelly, hello, Kelly. Hello, Tracy McClatchy, good to see you. Winter is checking in from far off but very fondly remembered New Zealand. Isaac is calling in from closer but still almost as foreign. Anyway, and who else here? Steve Gurr checking in. Tim Speckens, good to see you, Tim. Stacy Thompson Cawthorn. Yes, good. Okay, I thought that's what it was, but I lost it there for a moment. Claudia, a pleasure as always. Barb Ann, same for you. Ivan, my old friend, good to see you. Emily, hello, Emily. Good to see you too. Medardo, bienvenido, señor. And there's Chenoa and Joanna, who I did say hi to Joanna. And Mark Gambal, hello, good to see you, Mark. Susan Shamblin, and the ubiquitous 3 more. It always says that, and I never know. Oh, well, one of them might be Paul Alvarado, who just checked in. Thank you very much, Paul. That's very kind. I just ran across your number in my phone the other day while I was in the midst of doing something else, and I was wondering how you were doing too. So I hope this holiday weekend does you well, and or this holiday coming up. And thank you very much for the kind words. Love to talk to you sometime. We'll work on that. So I think I've said hello to most of the people except for the three that were, and three more. Yeah, I should start a band and call it that. And three more. That would have to be a foursome, I suppose. Anyway, yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I needed to talk about. No, not really. So I think I'm going to start reading tonight because we're starting a new chapter. So who knows how far we might go. Could be very exciting. We could get a big chunk read tonight. I also want to mention quickly, I'm always very open to speculating pointlessly about actors and stuff like that. As I mentioned last night, when we were talking way back in the day about the possibility of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn getting made into something like this, which was actually before Game of Thrones, because my books predated Game of Thrones by a few years at the very least. I don't remember exactly, but more like 10 or 15 years maybe. Anyway, at the time, back then we were talking about Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, and I said last night, this was so long ago that my two candidates for playing teenage Simon, who's remember supposed to be 14 or 15, were Eric Stoltz and Matthew Modine. And to the best of my knowledge, both of those actors have to be in their 50s now. So, and I was proposing them at the time for teenage Simon. So it just goes, that's one of the reasons, of course, I don't, take any of this too seriously until it actually happens. But it's still fun. It's a fun game to play. And those were fun times online, even though there never was an MS&T adaptation. Might be someday, again, probably after I'm dead, when I do finally get famous. Famous for being dead, probably. I could accomplish that. I could go out in a blaze of glory if I went out and did something really exciting, like set myself on fire in front of an Arby's, protesting the the removal of the cheesesteak. I don't know. Anyway, so I think that was everything I wanted to say. So yeah, feel free to ask questions or whatever. I'm mostly only doing Facebook these days, although Deb has kind of reopened our Twitter /X page because there were a lot of questions from her Twitter /X following, which is large, which is substantially large. So, but if you want to get me personally, Facebook is the best place, and you can drop me a question there, and I will do my best to find it and answer it. So, okay, without any further ado, we return to the Witchwood Crown, and the end of the previous chapter, as I recall, was, oh God, what was the end of the last chapter? Oh, right, it was a combination of both the Scytha woman that Pasivales had brought into the castle, being restrained, and her finally regaining sensibility to the point of being able to ask some questions, and being very upset when she found out her horse was gone and her saddlebags were all but empty. Then Pasivales asked Brother Eitan to go to do this thing that he had been asked to do, which was to go visit Princess Idela, the widow of John Josua, Simon and Miriam L's son. She had a bunch of books and that had belonged to her late husband. And in the course of looking at those books and other things, Brother Eitan found a book that had been banned all over Ostenard and was considered to be dangerous, heretical, even deadly. And he had kind of said to her, "Oh, can I take this one back?" and had taken it back to his room. And that was the last of that chapter. So now we are chapter 16, A Layer of Fresh Snow. Why should I? Morgan couldn't look directly at her. When he was angry in front of her this way, he felt like a child again, foolish and irresponsible, and that only made him more angry. Grandfather doesn't want me there. Well, I want you there, the queen told him. That should be enough. She blew on her fingers to warm them. Seeing his grandmother's red, cold hands, Morgan was unhappy with both her and himself, although he was not sure why. After they had left Elvertsala to begin their trip home, a spring blizzard had forced the royal progress off the road south, so for the moment they were guests at Blarbreck Castle, the home of Jarl Halli and his family. The Jarl was still in Elvertsala because of his Grimner's funeral and Grimbrand's succession, but Halli's daughter and servants had welcomed the king and queen in their lord's absence. Lady Gerda was still apologizing for the lack of food and clean linen, but thanks to the able planning of Sir Jeremias, the royal progress carried enough of both to serve in most unexpected calamities. "Don't sulk," the queen said. "Your grandfather does want you to attend the council." "Oh, does he? You heard him, grandmother. He was going to send me back to Urchester in disgrace. That's what he said, because I'm irresponsible." "And why did he say that, Morgan? Because you deliberately left your guards behind and went out into a strange city in the middle of the night? And onto a frozen lake? Why does the king care so much? He's not the one who's got bruises from head to toe." Morgan knew this was not a very good argument, but even days later and leagues away from the scene of his embarrassment, he was still aching. "And why isn't little Snennek in trouble? It was his idea." The queen shook her head, half amused, half appalled. "Saints defend us! What?" He realized he was getting loud, which was another useful way to humiliate himself. "Look, Prince Morgan is outside shouting at the queen. He's like a spoiled child, you know. Why is everyone always furious with me?" "I said don't sulk, young man." Queen Miriamel took her hands out of the sleeves of her robe, long enough to push a strand of wet red gold hair out of Morgan's face, reminding him that to the aged king and queen he would probably never seem a grown man. "I can think of few less attractive traits in a prince," the queen continued, "and your sister Lilia is beginning to do it too. Yes, your grandfather lost his temper with you, but with good reason. You are the heir to the high throne, Morgan. The lives of all the people in all the lands we've traveled since the new year will depend on you. If you fall into a freezing lake and drown, who will be our heir?" "I know. I'm not stupid." His grandmother sighed. "I do not have the strength for this, your highness. Come to the council or stay away, as you wish. But a real prince must learn to overcome his feelings for the good of his people." "What does this council have to do with the good of anyone? A lot of talking, a lot of tired old stories." His grandmother closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. "There is a grave difference between old stories and history, young man, although sometimes it's hard to know which is which. Some stories seem old, but they never end, and they are just as important today as they were a century ago. The Norns were here long before our Erkenland existed, and they still live in their dreadful mountain up north, swarming in the dark like white beetles. If they come out again, they will gladly kill every one of us, even your younger sister. Is that nothing but an old story?" He looked down at his feet for a bit. Morgan understood that she was trying to make peace in a way, but something dark and raging had a grip on him, and he couldn't shake it loose. "If the Norns are so dreadful and terrible," he said at last, "then why didn't you kill them all when you had the chance? Why didn't grandfather do anything about them then, instead of staying home and sending that old Northman Dukes Grimner to chase after them?" He felt a kind of sick satisfaction at seeing his grandmother's features go pale with fury. "You do not know how lucky you are that I love you as much as I loved your father, Morgan. The queen's words were carefully measured, colder than the fluttering snow. "Or I would slap your face for that. You speak of things you know nothing about. No, look at me." Morgan had not expected his flailing to result in an actual wound and did not want to look at her. He was much more interested in his snow-flecked boots. "By Saint Riapa and the Holy Mother, boy, I said look at me, and I meant it." Morgan raised his eyes and wished he hadn't. The shocked anger on the queen's face had become something more daunting, an expression that was no expression at all, like the parade figure of a warrior saint. He was not sure he'd ever seen her so unhappy with him, and his stomach churned. "Very well," he said with what he knew was poor grace. "I'm sorry. The Duke was your friend. I know. He was a great man. I'm sorry, and I'm a fool, and I take it all back." "You take it all back." The queen leaned forward and dropped her voice. "Listen to me well, child. Unless you manage to kill yourself with some stupid prank and break our hearts, you will be a king someday. You must learn to think not only before you act, but also before you speak. Among your family and our courtiers and servants, you might only hurt feelings, but with others, you might begin a war. Yes, a war, just by talking stupidly about people and situations you don't understand." She took a deep breath. "But I do not have the time to correct all your ignorance now. I am going inside. You have been invited to join us, which, I may remind you, is what is expected of a prince your age, and is not some irksome chore. But you may do as you please." She turned as if to go, but stopped in the doorway. "This is not the end. If you cannot manage to consider your words first, then I advise that you learn to speak less, young Prince Morgan. Much less." Morgan knew he should follow her, but the unhappiness inside him wanted cold and suffering and solitude, so he lingered in the colonnade after she'd gone. Despite the quiet, he heard nothing until he felt the touch on his arm. "Holy ransomer!" he cried, startled, but when he turned he saw not a creeping Norn, but a figure like a fat child in a hooded jacket. "Snenick, you startled me." "It is true," said the troll, grinning, "that I am silent like the Uituko beast, who can cross snow without breaking even the crust." Kina came up behind her, betrothed. "Yes, silent," she said, with a nod and a fond smile. "Clomp, clomp, crunch, crunch. Oh, no, rabbit run away." "She teases only, friend Morgan," Snenick assured him. "She knows that I have many gifts, but she likes to take fun of me. Women are not always having enough seriousness. Do you agree?" "Doubtless. Where have you two been?" Despite his irritation at the trouble that had come to him from the troll's ice-sliding expedition, he was grateful for the company, or at least the distraction. It was quickly becoming clear that standing outside in the cold had not been one of his better ideas. "I looked for you earlier." "The kitchen," said Snenick promptly. "It was very instructing and full of nice smelling. The kitchen woman lady has a name of great power and longness. She said it is Erna, but may God save me if they ever call me anything but where's my supper. We were being much impressed. Nobody in Chicanuk has such a mouthful of name." "And I eat a dimple," said Kina proudly. "Dimple?" "Dumple," explained Snenick. "From the stew Erna long name was at making." "Ah," said Morgan. "Dumpling." "I so much liked it," Kina said, her eyes a little dreamy. "Most fluffy." Little Snennek seemed concerned the conversation had wandered too far afield from his original purpose, so he gave his betrothed a meaningful look, then tried a new and more dignified tack. "Now, friend and Prince Morgan, we have come, in truth, for asking, will you join out to the water with us? A trip to the lake." "No, in the name of all the saints, why would I?" Morgan wrapped his arms around himself and grimaced. "I still hurt all over from last time, and I was nearly sent home by my grandparents for sneaking out with you. Why would you want to go out on another lake anyway? It's freezing cold." "To fish," little Snennek said. "It is good the lake is freezing, so we can go out among the ice. We are cutting a hole in it, then we are lowing into it the string for the fish to take with the... He turned to Kina and made a shape with his finger. "Hawk," she suggested. "Hook?" tried Morgan. Snennek turned to the prince in delight. "That is being it, yes. A hook on the string, and the fish are coming. Hungry fish down at the cold bottom. We will catch many." "I can't. I'm still in bad grace with my grandparents for going out to the lake in Elvertshalle." Little Snennek shook his head. "For my part, I am sorry. My father-in-law and mother-in-law, as they will one day be, were also upset with me. 'Snennek,' they said, 'you are having no right for leading the prince into danger. But we can go and find your guards or your swordsman friends to accompany our lake expedition.' Morgan didn't like that idea either. Was he a child, like his sister, in constant need of being watched? If the old people had their way, we'd sit all day at their feet, waiting to be spoken to." He contemplated his wearisome lot in life. "Do you have any of that kang-kang with you?" Little Snennek did indeed happen to be carrying a skin full of the tart, chest-warming beverage. Morgan accepted a long draught. "I don't need any guards," he said as he handed it back. "But my grandmother wants me to join her and the rest of them in the hall, the nobles and all. They're talking about the Norns and if there will be a war." In truth, he was still strongly considering avoiding the council meeting. He felt sure Astrian and Ulvaris would have found somewhere warm by now, a place to drink and tell lies without interference from Morgan's royal obligations. "Ah," said Snennek, impressed. "Then that is being something important, and you must, of course, give them your counsel. You are having a good fortune, Prince Morgan." And Kina nodded, agreeing. "Good fortune?" "They are at recognizing your wisdom, even with your young age. I have all my life been studying and practicing for importance in my tribe, but had scorning for my reward. It was only Kina's father, the so wise Binakega Benik, who was recognizing my cleverness. All the rest of the older Kanuk were thinking me foolish. Even a bragger." He frowned, then thumped his chest with his fist. "It was harming to even a heart of great bravery, like little Snennek's. But see, your people are more wisely thinking of you, Morgan Prince. They seek your counseling. They know your worthfulness." Morgan doubted that his grandparents and the rest truly did know his worthfulness. He wasn't exactly certain of it himself, but as he considered Snennek's words, he had to admit that he would also have been angry if the king and queen had not asked him to join them. Would they ask him again if he stayed away this time? They would surely call it sulking, a word he loathed from the depths of his being. No, the more he thought about it, the more Morgan realized that it was the only sensible strategy. He would show up, and when they ignored him, as they always did, his grandmother would have to admit he had been right. In any case, I suppose I'd better be off, he said. Good luck with your fishing. Don't fall in. It had been meant as a jest, but Morgan felt a pang of regret when he realized how sorry he would feel if anything bad happened to either of them, and he quickly made the sign of the tree. But Snenek seemed immune to such superstitious doubts. Ho, ho! I will be giving it my closest attention. It is the fish who will be coming out, Morgan Prince, not little Snenek who will be falling in. True, said Kina, because his leg, hold it will be, by me. Morgan watched them walk away across the courtyard, two small shapes hand in hand. When they had gone, he straightened his shoulders and headed inside to try to be a prince. If there was one thing that age had taught Eolair of Nadmulach, it was that the present instant was no more real than a layer of fresh snow. As he had seen this morning on a slow walk around the Blarbreck Castle Commons, the drifts might make everything look clean and new, but underneath waited the same old trees, stones, and earth. The older he got, the more he realized how unusual true change was. These thoughts had been spurred by Prince Morgan's coming in from the cold to join them all at the table in the Earl's study, although why Morgan did so was a bit unclear, since the prince looked as though he expected to be scolded for something. It was funny, actually. Eolair had not known King Simon well until the young man took the throne of Erkenland, but he was certain he'd witnessed similar baffled, angry expressions on Simon's face during his first years of rule. And yet now the same look from his grandson irritated the king to no end. To be fair, Eolair had to admit that Morgan's unhappy expression irritated him a bit too. He hoped the prince's appearance here was the beginning of a true change, not merely a new layer of snow. Morgan needed to take more interest in the affairs of the land, and not only because of a possible new threat from the north. Eolair was growing very dubious about King Hugh in Hernistir, the squabbling between the brothers in Naban, and in fact the future of the High Ward. Decade after decade, it seemed, the old players shuffled off the scene, but those who followed them acted out the same parts, the same rituals of greed and foolishness. But it's not entirely their fault, Eolair thought. The young don't realize that they know almost nothing, or that nothing is ever new. That's their glory, and their most dangerous flaw. What we need most now is knowledge, King Simon declared, pulling Eolair's attention back to the council at hand, as if he had guessed his secret thoughts and meant to share them. Merciful Eusiris, how I miss Dr. Morganes. Jaloi, too, of course, bless her, without their wisdom, and with no word from the Scythi, we can only guess at what the Norns might be doing. Yes, but we are without them, said Miriamel. We must think about what we do know and what we need to learn. Prince Morgan stirred. Morganes, he was the one my father named me after, wasn't he? I never understood that because everyone says they didn't even know each other. Your father never met him, but he read Morganes' book about your great-grandfather, King John, Simon said. That is how he knew him and why he honored him, and you with the name. He gave the prince a stern look. And you should have read that book by now, too, as you kept promising you would. I managed when I was younger than you, and I scarcely knew how to read. You would have learned many lessons about kingship, and you would also know something about your father's namesake. Dr. Morganes was indeed being very wise. Benedict now did what Eolair, as Hand of the Throne, usually had to do in such situations, namely try to unpick quarrels before they began. Eolair was grateful to let someone else do it for a change. But all wise people are not being gone from the world. Some of them are here now. The troll smiled. I am not speaking of myself with certainty, but instead our good Tiamat and Count Eolair, who between them have been seeing and reading so very many things. And, Majesties, you are wise ones yourselves. Few others have been at doing the things that you have. You rate yourself too modestly, Simon said with a brief smile. But nobody here knows very much about the Norns, and that's what we need right now. The Scythi could help us, God knows, but they stay stubbornly silent. That's why I miss Morghennes and his wisdom so much right now. That's why I miss Jaloi. Who is Jaloi, anyway? Morgan asked. I've heard people saying her name. She was a Valada, said Benebek. What the Rimmers folk call a wise woman. A very wise woman, said Miriamel. She was a shapeshifter, said Tiamat. She could take the form of an owl. I saw her do it with my own eyes. She was a witch, Eolair said, then could not help smiling at the faces of the others as they turned toward him. But of course she was. What else would you call her that would be more truthful? And Hernesteer, where I was raised, the word is not quite so fearful as it is for you Aidenites. She could walk the road of dreams. By sweet Misha's reins, Tiamat is right. She could even take the form of a bird. She'd lived 400 years or more, said Simon. Really? Said Tiamat. How do you know that, Majesty? Aditu told me. Aditu? Who is that? Asked Morgan, a touch plaintively. A woman of the Scythi, his grandmother said. One of our closest allies. 400 years old, said Tiamat. Amazing. When Jaloi was dying, I heard Aditu call her Ruyan's own. Perhaps that was true. Perhaps she really was a great-great-grandchild of the Navigator. The Tanukadaya nearly all lived longer than men. This isn't fair, said Morgan. I'm trying to pay attention, I swear I am, but who are all these people? Who's the Navigator, and what does he have to do with this Jaloi? What's a Tanukida, or whatever you said, and what do any of these old stories have to do with someone finding dead Norns in a cow pasture in Rimmersgard last winter, which is what I thought you were all talking about? Norns, yes, but Scythi as well, said Benebek. That is the strangest thing we were hearing. But it is good that you have questions, Prince Morgan, Benebek said. Perhaps, though, it is being too much for learning all in one day. But Eolair saw a moment to educate the prince, a rare moment when the young man actually seemed to want to learn. The Norns and the Scythi were once all one family, Highness, one race, he explained, but not the Tanukadaya, Ruyan, the Navigator's people. They were mostly slaves and servants, at least in the early days. Even their leader, Ruyan, it is said, with all his skill and craft, was no more than a thrall to the immortals. Long, long ago, he and his people built a fleet of ships to carry the Scythi and the Norns here from the place they called the Garden. The king nodded. My Scytha friend, Jariki, said that too, that the Scythi and the Norns brought Ruyan's people here as slaves. I do not know where the Tanukadaya came from. Jariki said their name means ocean children. And it's true that some of them live almost always on ships at sea. Miriamel met some. The Niskis, said the queen, nodding. In fact, one of them, Ganitai, saved my life. The Niskis are the ones who protect the Nabanai ships by singing the Kilpa down. Ah, said Morgan, grasping at something he recognized. Kilpa! I have heard of those things. Terrible fishy creatures that steal sailors in the south from their ships and drown them. You are correct, Highness, Eolair said by way of encouragement. And I have met the Tanukadaya too, but from one of their other tribes, he said, remembering the frightened, big-eyed Dueros of Mezutua. You see, these Tanukadaya are a race of changelings that can be as different in form between themselves as a noble lady's lapdog is to a mastiff. These things matter to us now because all the creatures we are talking about, Scythi, Norns, Tanukadaya, live a long time. Some of them live damn near forever, said King Simon. I'd guess the Norn Queen is still alive even if she lost her power, as Aditu told us. Jariki once said she was the oldest living thing in the world. He turned to the young prince. That's why we want you to know these things, Morgan. Someday, your grandmother and I will be gone, but the Norns won't be. But isn't there anyone now, like this Jaloi? Asked Morgan, who seemed finally to have grasped the seriousness of their concerns. Somebody who knows about the Norns and what they might be doing? There is being nobody like Jaloi, said Bennebic with a sad smile. Not before and not now that she is being gone. And there is also being nobody living today as knowledgeable about these things as your namesake, Dr. Morganis, Prince Morgan. No, it seems we will have to find the solving of this ourselves. The troll was right, Eolair realized, even as the others began again to discuss the Norns and what Lady Alva's story might mean. There was no other like Jaloi. Eolair had not known her well. He had only been in her presence for a few days when he had visited Prince Joshua's camp during the Storm King's War. But the memory of her bright hunting bird's eyes would never leave him. From a distance she had looked like many other peasant women, short but solid, with the cropped hair and unprepossessing clothes of someone who cared little what others might think of her. But to be in her presence, to be examined by that yellow stare, had been to feel her power. Not the might of a conqueror, or even a will in search of mastery over others, but the unself-conscious power of a stone standing in the middle of a mighty river. Something which did not move, but instead let everything else bend around it in a rush of pointless motion and noise. And she had dirty fingernails, Eolair remembered. Something else he had liked about her. Too busy doing what needed doing to waste any time being anything but herself. Gods, yes, he thought. We would be immeasurably better off if all the scroll-bearers still lived. Jaloi and Morganis and Yarnauga and Father Deniven. And if they were all here now to tell us what to do. But Jaloi had died at the hands of the Norns, as had Yarnauga. And the Red Priest Priorites had murdered Father Deniven in the Sancellan Adenitis and burned Dr. Morganis to death in his own chambers. Eolair looked around the room. Here they all sat, the king and queen, the trolls from distant Yikanuk, Tiamak, who had been born in the marshy Ran, and young Morgan, confused and frustrated by all the things he did not understand. But now we are the ones who must protect the realm, Eolair thought. It is up to us to be those that others will speak of in some future time, the ones of whom they will say, thank the gods they were here. Because if we are not, if the tide of vengeance comes rolling down from the north again, and we fail to hold what others helped us keep at the last time of darkness, there might be nothing to say, and no one left to say it. Miriamel had just sent her ladies ahead to prepare the bedchamber when she noticed Bennebic waiting at the door of the Jarl's study. The small man looked tired, but she thought she might still be unused to this aged version of a familiar face. She smiled at him. It is so good to see you and Siski, Bennebic. And your child, Kina. She's grown to be such a beauty. It all gives me heart. He bumped his fist against his chest. "Heart is what we are all sometimes needing. As we say in Yikanuk, fear is the mother of wisdom, but every child must be leaving the home one day." Miriamel was still trying to work that out when Simon finished his conversation with Sir Kenrick about the disposition of the guards. Since they were staying in the house of a trusted ally, there had apparently been little to discuss. Sir Kenrick paused in the doorway and bowed deeply to the Queen, then looked down at the troll and made a curious half-bow, like an overbalanced nod. As with most of his fellows, the stocky Captain Marshal never quite knew how to treat the royal couple's odd friends. Matters of deference and title were often especially difficult. Just a fortnight past, Miriamel knew, Lord Chamberlain Jeremias had been almost in tears trying to decide what Benebic's rank, singing man of Mintahawk Mountain, signified as far as precedence at table. "He's my oldest and closest friend," Simon had told him, then hurriedly added, "After you, Jeremias, of course." "One more question," Kenrick said now, "begging your Majesty's pardons. Perhaps if we make good time to Westvenby, we could give the men a day of freedom there. It would cheer them up after all this snow and short rations." "I'm sure that can be arranged," said Simon. "We will consider it, Sir Kenrick," the Queen said with a meaningful glance at her husband. "Why shouldn't they have a day in Westvenby?" the king asked when the captain had departed. "I didn't say they shouldn't, although we've lost time already with this storm. I just said we would consider it. Together. Before we make announcements." "I didn't think you would disagree." "You don't know unless you ask, husband." He pursed his lips, but at last nodded. "I suppose that's true." For a moment, she wanted only to put her arms around him. Only for the two of them to be alone somewhere, without responsibilities, just a husband and wife. But that would not happen. That would never happen. She sighed and squeezed his hand. "Right, then. I think Benebic is waiting to speak with you." "With both of you? To speak with exactness?" said the troll, stepping forward. "But it is about something you were saying another day, friend Simon. When we were in Elvritsala, you told that you have stopped dreaming. Was that a true saying?" An expression crossed her husband's face that also reminded her of a younger Simon, a worried one. "It was," he said. "It is. You know I've always had strange dreams, Benebic, but especially in the Storm King years. I dreamed of the Uden tree, didn't I? Long before I saw it. The wheel, never knowing I'd be strapped to one. And I dreamed of Stormspike Mountain back in those days as well, and the Norn Queen when I didn't know anything about her. In Jaloy's house when we walked the Dream Road, remember?" Benebic nodded. "Of course, I am remembering. And also what the great Sitha lady, Amarasu, told you, that you were perhaps one closer to the Road of Dreams than others. Has it changed in the years we have been apart?" Simon shook his head. "Not truly. Sometimes it is less, but in the weeks before our son John Josua got ill, I dreamed of Pryrates every night. Mary can tell you." "No, I can't. I don't want to remember." Sometimes it seemed like that terrible loss was everywhere around her, barely hidden, and to poke at anything, no matter how seemingly innocuous, was to risk revealing it. A moment before she had been thinking of 1,000 other things, but now it was back, the pain nearly as fresh as the moment they had lost their only child. "But yes," she said when she had composed herself, "Simon had terrible dreams in those days. Terrible. Once I dreamed that Pryrates was a cat and that John Josua was a mouse, but he didn't know—" "Enough!" said Miriamel, far more harshly than she had intended. When the two of them looked at her in surprise, she could only wave her hand. I'm sorry, but I can't bear to hear it again. Benedict frowned in sympathy. I do not think the whole story must be told again, but I do have more questions for asking. Should I take your husband somewhere else to speak with him? No, I'm well. If it's important, I want to know too. Go ahead. She was a queen, she reminded herself. The queen. She would not hide from mere emotion, no matter how terrible its source or painful its visitation. Was it during a single night that this stopping happened, Simon? Benedict asked him. Or is it something that only later came to your notice? He thought about it. When did I tell you about it? The night Sludig and his wife came, wasn't it? What saint's day was that? He frowned and pulled on his beard. Saint Vultinia, wasn't it? Benedict smiled. I fear I do not know the Adonite saints so well, except that they are many and their statue faces are mostly frowning. Can't blame them for that, with what happened to most of them, Simon said. Lilia had a book her other grandfather gave her. Vultinia, yes, that was it. That one stuck with me. The Imperator's soldiers cut off all her fingers, but she said she could still feel God's presence. Isn't that right, Mary? Miriamel shuddered. If you say so. It's a horrid book to give a child. Why are you asking about such a thing? So I can know what day it was that I noticed about my dreams. St. Vultinia's day is the 3rd day of Avril. He turned back to Benedict. That means it must have been the end of Maris, when I last had a dream I can remember. I went to bed late one night, the night of his Grimner's funeral, I guess it was, and had a very strange one. There was a black horse in a field, and it was foaling, but the foal didn't come out, and it was struggling, almost as though it was fighting not to be born. I don't know what it could signify. He shook his head, remembering. And the black mare was screaming, and it was so terrible I woke up in a sweat. Do you remember, Mary? She shrugged. I did not sleep well the night of his Grimner's funeral either. That's all I remember. In any case, Simon said, when I laid my head down again, I fell at once back into sleep, but it was like falling down a dark hole. Dark, but no dreams. And I swear I haven't dreamed since. This sort of talk made Miriamel anxious. Perhaps, as you said, you simply don't remember them, Simon. Sometimes I don't remember my dreams either until someone mentions something that reminds me. He shook his head emphatically. No, this is different. Benedict reached into his tunic and brought out a leather bag. The last night of Maris month. You call that Fool's Night, do you not? That's right, Simon smiled. I remember thinking during the funeral that good old Grimner would have enjoyed a proper all-fools celebration better, with drunken priests and masks and whatnot. Grimner was indeed a man for merrymaking and loud singing, but I think Fool's Night is for more than merriment. Benedict was pouring the contents of the leather bag into his hands, a pile of small polished bones. In the mountains we are having something much like it at the leaving of winter, a moment of changing fortune. My master Ukekuk called it Sohik Namayua, a night of thin ice, when the walls between this world and others are more easily crossed. Simon was staring at the troll's knuckle bones with a mixture of fascination and concern. I haven't seen those in a long time. I thought maybe you'd stopped using them. Stopped casting the bones? No, I have been teaching their use to little Snenek of late, and I do not like to tire them. Miriamel almost smiled at the idea of tiring out a little pile of bones. I always wondered about those, she admitted, ever since I first met you in the forest. Whose bones are they? Benedict gave her a stern look. Mine, of course. He turned to Simon. Do you mind if I am casting them for you? Losing your way to the road of dreams is seeming strange to me, and on such a night of thin ice, even more. Simon shook his head. No, of course not. And I think that's where we're going to stop for the night, because we still have quite a bit of it. Oh, actually, no, there's not. I'm going to finish the chapter. Never mind. Simon shook his head. No, of course not. Benedict rolled the clicking bones in his hand and chanted quietly to himself, then crouched and spilled them from his palm onto the stone flags. He stared at them for long moments, then scooped them up and threw again. After he had thrown and considered for a third time, he looked up. It is a strange casting. That is all I can say now, without much thought. First it was black crevice, then slippery snow. Now for the last I see unexpected visitor, which we also call no shadow. All are signs of deceit and confusion. What does that mean? Simon asked. Who can be saying without thought? Benedict carefully picked up the tiny yellowed shapes and returned them to the leather sack. He spoke a few more whispered words over it, then tucked it into his tunic. I must consider. I will think of all that my wise master Okekuk taught me. Unexpected visitor I have not been seeing for many, many years. It is puzzling to me. Excuse me. He stood, levering himself up with a grunt and a brief grimace. Miri, who could remember when the troll had been as swift and spry as a squirrel, when they had all been so nimble, felt a moment's sadness. I will also be at considering if there... Excuse me. Goodness. I will also be at considering if there is something useful to be done for this not dreaming that afflicts you, friend Simon. I'm not sure it's a kindness to give him back his bad dreams, Mary said. But in the days of the Storm King's War, there were things we could have been learning from Simon's dreams, Benedict told her. Important things. Can we afford being ignorant now? Not if ignorance is a risk to our people, Simon said. They're what matters. Benedict reached up and squeezed Mary's hand. I was teasing you before, he said. Just a small teasing. The knuckle bones belong to me, but they are not from a person. They are the ankle bones of sheep. He showed her his familiar yellow smile. Do you forgive my joking queen and friend Miriamel? Oh, without doubt, she told him. But the talk of Simon's bad dreams had not made a disturbing day any less so. And that's where we're quitting. And coming up next week, or whenever we next resume, will be Chapter 17, White Hand. So, with that, let me put the bookmark there. With that, I'm wrapping it up for the night. Gonna go get something to eat. Kick back. Who knows? Who knows? It's Sunday evening. Anything is possible. I might even pet the dog. The possibilities are simply endless. Anyway, thank you all so very much for joining me. As always, great pleasure to have you and share time with you. I will be back either next week or the week after, depending. It may be a problem because of Christmas for many reasons, and it might not be the best weekend for a lot of my friends and readers either. So whatever, one way or another, I will let you know fairly soon. And until that point, take good care of yourselves, take good care of your loved ones, take good care of anybody you have a chance to help, because you can never tell when you might need somebody to do the same for you, and that's the rules the universe works with. Okay? Honest to God, I'm old. I know about these things. Okay. Take care. Have a good night. Peace, and be well. Talk to you soon.